Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. I woke up that morning feeling the familiar weight of routine. Another day of meetings, spreadsheets, and polite small talk. But it was when I glanced across the breakfast table where Lisa sat sipping her coffee that something shifted. It wasn't obvious, just a fleeting look, the slightest hesitation before she put her phone face down beside her plate. That's when it started, the seed of doubt planted deep in my mind. I shrugged it off at first. We had been together for 12 years. Our marriage was stable, predictable even. But that tiny shift lingered. Lisa and I had settled into a rhythm over the years. She worked as a yoga instructor and personal trainer, while I handled the financial consulting world. Our life together was comfortable, almost too comfortable, in that suffocating way you don't even notice until it's too late. The kids were off at school and the house was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall. Marking time I suddenly felt slipping away. It wasn't like her to be so distracted. We had a routine, breakfast together, a kiss on the cheek as we parted ways for the day. But lately, something about her felt distant. It started with small things, coming home late from the gym, extra classes she claimed she needed to cover. At first, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She'd never given me a reason not to. But then there were the messages, late-night texts she tried to hide, calls she stepped out of the room to take. The first time I noticed, I told myself not to be paranoid. But as days passed, those little moments began to add up. That morning, after Lisa left for her yoga class, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where her phone had been. My gut twisted. Something was wrong. I stood and walked to the window, watching her car back out of the driveway. The doubt gnawed at me, refusing to let go. I tried to push it down, to convince myself I was imagining things, but the truth was clawing its way to the surface. The first time I really noticed it was a few weeks back. She came home late again. She had told me she was picking up groceries after work, but the bags were small, and the story didn't quite add up. There was a distance in her eyes, like she wasn't really present. I'd asked her about her day, and she answered in clipped sentences, avoiding eye contact. Her phone buzzed once, and she glanced at it quickly before slipping it into her bag. That look, it was a look I hadn't seen before. Nervous, maybe even guilty. I didn't question her. I didn't want to. But that night as we lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. The days that followed were filled with more of the same. Lisa's absences became more frequent, her excuses more rehearsed. She was careful but not careful enough. I could feel the truth lurking behind every late night, every unexplained hour. I found myself watching her more closely, studying her movements, her expressions. Each time her phone buzzed, my stomach knotted tighter. I tried to brush it off, to focus on work, but even there the suspicion followed me. I'd catch myself drifting during meetings, my mind wandering back to Lisa, wondering where she really was, who she was really with. I'd return home late myself some nights, hoping to find her waiting for me, ready to talk, to explain everything away. But she was always busy, her attention elsewhere. The tension between us grew thick, unspoken but palpable, hanging over every conversation. It wasn't until I saw her standing by the window one night, phone pressed to her ear, whispering in a voice she thought I couldn't hear, that I knew. She ended the call quickly when I walked into the room, her smile forced, her eyes darting away from mine. That was when it clicked. She was hiding something, and it wasn't innocent. I didn't confront her right away. I couldn't. Not until I had proof, not until I knew for sure. But my gut screamed at me with a certainty I couldn't ignore. I had to find out the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. The next morning, I woke up with a plan forming in my mind. It was time to stop ignoring the signs, time to take control of the situation. While Lisa was at work, I began searching for clues, anything that would confirm what I already suspected. Her phone was always with her, locked tight. But her computer? That was another story. She wasn't as careful with that. I waited until she went to the gym one evening, then opened her laptop. At first, I found nothing, just the usual, emails, work schedules, appointments. But then, buried in a folder marked personal, I found them. Emails. Dozens of them. Conversations between her and someone named Sean. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the messages, each one more damning than the last. There was no denying it now. She wasn't just having an affair. She was planning to leave me for him. They talked about vacations, secret getaways, places they could be alone, away from me, away from the life we had built together. The final blow came in the form of a photograph. It was hidden deep in her files, probably something she thought I'd never find. A picture of them together, smiling, arms wrapped around each other in a way that made my stomach churn. I couldn't look at it for more than a few seconds before slamming the laptop shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat there, in the silence of our home, trying to process what I had just seen. Everything I had known, everything I had trusted was a lie. I had given her 12 years of my life, and this was how she repaid me? With betrayal? With deceit? The anger came first, hot, sharp, burning through me like wildfire. But then, almost as quickly, it was replaced by something colder, something more dangerous. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. No, if she thought she could betray me and get away with it, she had another thing coming. I made a decision in that moment, one that I knew would change everything. I wasn't just going to confront her. I wasn't going to yell or scream or beg her to explain herself. I was going to take control, just like I always did in my work, my life. I would make her regret this. She wouldn't know when or how, but she would feel the full weight of what she had done to me. The seed of doubt that had been planted weeks ago had grown into something else entirely. It had blossomed into a plan, one that would leave her just as shattered as I felt in that moment. But I had to be smart, precise. This wasn't about rage anymore. This was about retribution. As I sat there in the quiet of our kitchen, the reality of my situation sinking in, I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the one in control now, and Lisa was about to find out just how dangerous that could be. The silence in the house became unbearable. Each tick of the clock drilled into my skull like a countdown. I knew what I had seen. There was no escaping it now. But my mind demanded more. More proof, more clarity, more certainty. I couldn't just confront her with a handful of emails and a photo. No, it had to be irrefutable, comprehensive, and devastating. I needed to understand the depth of her betrayal before I acted. I started small, subtle. I had access to her phone when she wasn't looking. Lisa never hid it completely. She didn't think I had any reason to suspect her. It was carelessness on her part. Arrogance, even. The password was easy to guess. Dates meant everything to her, and she'd chosen our anniversary. I waited until she was in the shower, then slipped into her phone. At first, there was nothing, no messages, no calls out of the ordinary. But then I checked the deleted messages. She thought she was being smart, erasing any trace of Sean from her phone. But it didn't take long to recover them. There they were, hundreds of texts. They weren't just friendly exchanges either. They were intimate, personal, laced with inside jokes, moments I'd never shared with her. It was as if she had an entirely different life with him, one that I was never meant to see. I sat there staring at the screen, my blood turning cold. There were messages about late-night meetups, plans for weekends I thought she'd spent at yoga retreats. Even more damning were the messages where they discussed me. They laughed at how oblivious I was, at how easy it had been to hide everything. Each word felt like a knife, cutting deeper into the hollow pit forming in my chest. I made sure not to leave a trace, locking her phone exactly how I had found it. The shower was still running when I stepped back into the hallway, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. This wasn't just a fling, it was deliberate, calculated, a year of lies. I realized then that I wasn't just dealing with infidelity. I was dealing with someone who had stopped caring about me long ago. That night, I installed tracking software on her phone. It was easy, almost too easy. She'd never notice it, never realize that I could now see everything she did in real time. Every message she sent, every call she made, every location she visited. The pieces of her betrayal started falling into place. Every time she left the house, I watched her route on the app, waiting to see where she would go. She wasn't just going to the gym like she said. She was meeting him, Sean. Each time the name on my screen felt like poison. In the following days, my suspicions deepened as I watched their exchanges unfold. They planned dinner dates, meetups at hotels, places I had never been. It was surreal, like I was living in someone else's life, looking in from the outside. She had been careful, but not careful enough. I started taking notes, documenting every location, every message. There would be no denying it once I confronted her. I wanted every single detail. I wanted to strip away the lies she had woven around me and leave her with nothing but the raw truth. One day I followed her. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The app showed me exactly where she was heading, a downtown restaurant we used to frequent, now the stage for her deceit. I parked a block away and watched from a distance as she met him. Sean, a tall man, younger than me, smug in his confidence. He smiled as she approached him, kissed her on the cheek like it was the most natural thing in the world. My stomach churned, a mix of fury and disgust rising in my throat. I wanted to storm into that restaurant, throw everything into chaos right there, but I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. This was just one piece of the puzzle. I needed more. I waited, watching them through the window as they talked, laughed, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit them. When they finally left, hand in hand, I stayed in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I would make them pay. But it had to be the right time. As I dug deeper, the scope of their affair became clearer. There were pictures, dozens of them, tucked away in hidden folders on her computer and phone. Photos of vacations I never knew about, snapshots of them together in places she had once promised we'd visit. The pain was overwhelming, but beneath it, something colder grew. I was no longer the fool in this story. I was the one in control now, watching their every move without them ever realizing it. I kept up the charade at home. Lisa had no idea that I knew. She still smiled at me, still tried to act as though everything was normal, but her affection had turned mechanical, rehearsed. I could see through every gesture, every word. It was like watching a play where the actors had long forgotten their lines but pretended the audience hadn't noticed. I noticed. Late one night, she came home later than usual, her excuses flimsy and rushed. She claimed she had been caught up in a late class that she had stayed to talk to clients. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated, as if she was afraid I might ask more questions. But I didn't. I played my part, nodding, smiling, pretending to believe her. Inside, I seethed. That evening, I checked her phone. She had met Sean, as usual, at the same hotel they frequented. My patience was wearing thin. The worst part wasn't the affair itself. It was how easily she could lie to me, how effortlessly she wove her stories together. There was no remorse, no guilt in her eyes. She had written me out of her life long before I even realized it. And that was why I had to destroy everything she held dear. Not just her relationship with Sean, but her entire sense of security, her world. One afternoon when she left for another client meeting, I hacked into her email. Sean had sent her an itinerary for a trip they were planning. 3 days at a cabin, just the two of them. The dates aligned perfectly. With a weekend, she had told me she would be out of town for a work seminar. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. The audacity of it, the ease with which she thought she could deceive me again. That was the moment I knew my revenge had to be more than just exposing the affair. It had to be absolute. She needed to feel what I had felt, helpless, trapped, betrayed. I began planning, not just their downfall, but her complete unraveling. I would strip away everything, her comfort, her finances, her life as she knew it. As I continued to gather evidence, I could feel the weight of the betrayal settling deep into my bones. The pictures, the texts, the emails, they were all pieces of a puzzle that, once complete, would destroy her. But I wasn't impulsive. No, I would wait until everything was perfectly aligned. Then I'd strike. Each day brought new discoveries. I learned how deeply intertwined their lives had become. They talked about building a future together, about leaving me behind like I was some obstacle in the way of their happiness. I read it all with a growing sense of detachment, as if I were studying characters in a book. It was easier that way. If I allowed myself to feel the anger in its rawest form, I wouldn't be able to hold back. And I needed to hold back, just a little longer. When I finally had everything I needed, when the evidence was airtight and there was no room for doubt, I knew it was time to act. My emotions had solidified into something unbreakable, a cold, calculated resolve. Lisa thought she could live two lives, one with me and one with him. But she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I sat down that night, looking over the documentation I had amassed. Every text, every location, every photo. The betrayal wasn't just a passing mistake, it was deliberate. She had built her own world, separate from ours, and she had no intention of coming back. My role now was simple, to tear that world apart, brick by brick. As I stared at the screen, the messages from Sean flashing before me, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, taking back what she had stolen from me. And I would do it with the same precision, the same cold logic that she had used to betray me. The time for discovery was over. Now came the reckoning. The anger had crystallized into something far more powerful, focus. For weeks, I had been teetering on the edge of it, wrestling with a storm of emotions that threatened to consume me. But now the fire had cooled, and what remained was the sharp edge of intent. I wasn't blinded by rage anymore. I saw everything clearly, how this needed to end, how Lisa's betrayal would come crashing down on her. The next step was removing the emotion from the equation. I had spent enough time drowning in hurt and fury, replaying every text message, every smirk she shared with Sean. That wasn't useful anymore. What I needed now was precision. This would not be some haphazard outburst. No, Lisa's life had to unravel methodically, piece by piece, just as mine had. I sat at my desk, staring at the piles of notes I had collected, the texts, the photos, the emails. Every small detail, every lie she'd fed me was cataloged here. I looked over her bank statements, her credit card bills, her social media posts, tracing the breadcrumbs of her affair with a cold detachment. Each entry in those logs was a key to the next move. I would strike in ways she wouldn't expect, hitting her where it would hurt the most. The first step was financial. I had full access to our accounts, and I wasn't going to let her walk away with a dime. I started by transferring the bulk of our savings into a private account she didn't know existed. It was easy enough, moving the funds in small amounts over several days. She was too distracted by Sean to notice. The house, the car, the kids' college savings, it was all under my control. By the time she realized what had happened, it would be too late, but that was just the beginning. I needed more than just financial devastation. This was about stripping away the comfort she had taken for granted, the life I had built for us, the stability she had abused. She needed to understand that her betrayal came with consequences. I considered the options carefully. Lisa was vain. Her image mattered to her more than she'd ever admit. The gym, her clients, her carefully curated social media presence, everything about her life was built on perception. I needed to attack that next. If I was going to destroy her, it would have to be from the inside out, where she was most vulnerable. I started small, setting the trap. Lisa had a close-knit group of friends, most of whom knew nothing about Sean. She had been careful to present the image of a loving wife and mother to them, hiding her affair behind a facade of yoga retreats and business meetings. I crafted an email, anonymous, from a burner account. A message that hinted at her indiscretions, vague enough to stir suspicion, but not enough to raise immediate alarm. just enough to plant the seed of doubt. Her perfect world was about to crack, and I would watch it shatter. As I sent the email, I felt a cold sense of satisfaction. I wasn't done yet, but this was the first push. Lisa had built her life on lies, and now those lies would start unraveling. She wouldn't know where it was coming from, but she'd feel it. The tension, the paranoia. She'd start looking over her shoulder, wondering who knew, who was watching. The next phase of my plan required patience. I couldn't let her catch on too quickly. I watched as she continued with her charade, pretending that nothing was wrong. She still came home late, still left for her client meetings, still texted Sean under the table while we ate dinner. But I could see the cracks forming. There was a nervousness in her eyes, a slight hesitation in her movements. She knew something was off, but couldn't put her finger on it. One evening, as we sat across from each other in silence, she finally brought it up. "Steve, have you noticed anything strange lately?" she asked, her voice uncertain, testing the waters. I looked up from my plate, feigning confusion. "Strange? Like what?" She hesitated, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "I don't know, just things feel different. People have been acting weird at the gym. It's like they know something, but no one's saying anything." I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. "Maybe you're imagining it." Her eyes darted away, unsettled. She was starting to feel the pressure, the weight of the lies catching up to her. But she had no idea just how deep it went. A few days later, Lisa came to me with another problem. Financial trouble. She had been dipping into our accounts for her little getaways with Sean, unaware that I had already drained most of our savings. I listened as she stumbled through an explanation, trying to justify why there was less money than she thought. I pretended to be surprised, playing the part of the clueless husband. "I don't know, Lisa. We've been spending a lot lately." "Maybe you've lost track." Her face paled, and I could see the panic rising in her. She had expected a cushion, a safety net, but I had already cut it away. Her perfect little life was starting to collapse, and I was enjoying every second of it. But she wasn't completely broken yet. Not until I hit her where it really hurt. Her relationship with Sean. I had been watching them long enough to know their routine, and it was time to disrupt it. I started by sending Sean an anonymous message, something cryptic and accusatory, just enough to make him suspicious of Lisa. It was amazing how easily people could be manipulated when they didn't know who to trust. Sean's texts to Lisa became less frequent, more strained. He started asking questions, subtle at first, but then more direct. "Is there something you're not telling me? Who else knows about us?" It was only a matter of time before their little fantasy world came crashing down. But the real blow came a week later when Lisa confronted me with their financial trouble. She was visibly shaken, trying to keep her composure, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "Steve, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "About what?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "The money. It's gone. I don't know what happened. We need to figure this out." I looked at her, pretending to process the information. "Gone? That's strange. Have you checked the statements?" "I did. There's barely anything left." "We don't have enough to cover the mortgage next month." I stood up slowly, walking to the window, pretending to be deep in thought. "That's troubling," I said, keeping my back to her. Her voice grew more desperate. "Steve, I don't know what to do." "I thought we had more saved." I turned to face her, and for the first time in weeks, I let a small smile cross my lips. "You thought wrong." She blinked, confused. "What?" I said, "You thought wrong, Lisa." Her confusion deepened, but then something shifted in her expression. Realization. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, as if trying to comprehend what I had just said. You did this?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to savor the moment, to let her feel the full weight of what was happening. "You thought you could get away with it?" I said, my voice calm but laced with steel. "The affair, the lies, all of it. You thought I wouldn't notice, didn't you?" Her face drained of color. "Steve, I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. It's over, Lisa. All of it. She shook her head, stepping back, her hands trembling. No, this can't be happening. It is, I said coldly, and it's just beginning. The shock, the betrayal, it was written all over her face. She wasn't just losing Sean, she was losing everything. I had stripped away the financial security she had relied on, poisoned her relationship, and now she stood in front of me, a hollow shell of the confident woman she had pretended to be. But I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Over the next few days, I tightened the noose. I made sure Sean received another message, this time with enough details to make him question everything about Lisa. They fought, their texts filled with accusations and denials, and finally, silence. Their relationship was crumbling under the weight of suspicion, just as I had planned. Lisa was unraveling, and I could see it in every interaction. She was jumpy, paranoid, her world spiraling out of control, but I remained calm, detached. This was just the beginning of her fall, and I was in control of every move. She didn't know it yet, but her life, as she knew it, was already gone. All that was left was for me to take the final step, to make her understand that she wasn't just losing me. She was losing everything. The morning Sean's location pinged on my phone, I knew the moment had come. I'd been tracking him for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity. Every lunch break, every business meeting Lisa had with him, it was logged. Today he'd veered off his usual route, heading toward a more isolated area, a park just outside the city where no one would see what I was about to do. I followed him, keeping my distance. The roads were empty, my car hidden behind a rise in the landscape as I waited for him to park. He stepped out of his SUV, stretching as if he had all the time in the world. The smug bastard. I watched him for a moment, allowing my anger to simmer just below the surface. But I couldn't let it boil over yet. Everything had to be perfect. I waited until he started walking deeper into the park, away from any prying eyes, away from the safety of his car. Then I stepped out of mine, locking it behind me. My pulse was steady, each beat calculating the next step. I had thought of every possibility, every outcome, and now I just needed to execute it. As I got closer, I could hear the faint sound of him humming to himself. He hadn't even noticed me yet. That arrogance of his, it sickened me. Lisa had chosen this over me, over the life I had given her. I clenched my fists, feeling the tension ripple through my body. Sean finally heard me approaching and turned, his face lighting up with a confused smile. "Hey man," he said, raising a hand in a casual greeting. He didn't recognize me at first, but I saw the flicker of realization when our eyes locked. His smile faltered, replaced with an expression of uncertainty. "Steve, what are you doing here?" I stepped closer, my gaze never leaving his. The lies, the betrayal, all of it condensed into the few feet that separated us. He shifted nervously, trying to maintain his composure, but I could see the cracks forming. "I know everything," I said, my voice low but firm, "about you and Lisa. About what you all been doing behind my back." Sean's eyes widened, his mouth opening as if to deny it, but I didn't give him the chance. I closed the distance in 2 quick strides, grabbing him by the collar of his jacket and slamming him against the nearest tree. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and for a moment I reveled in the look of shock on his face. His hands scrambled to push me off, but I was stronger, fueled by months of pent-up rage. "You thought you could just sneak around with my wife?" I hissed, my grip tightening. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" "Steve, man, this is a misunderstanding." His voice was trembling now, panic setting in. I cut him off with a punch to the gut, doubling him over as he gasped for air. His legs buckled, and I let him collapse to the ground, watching him writhe in pain. I stood over him, chest heaving, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. "Get up," I growled. He coughed, struggling to his feet. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but we both knew there was none. He took a shaky step back, raising his hands as if that would protect him. "Steve, don't do this." "I didn't mean—" "Shut up!" My fist connected with his face, and he stumbled back, clutching his nose as blood poured between his fingers. The fear in his eyes was almost satisfying, but not enough. I needed more. I needed him to feel the pain I'd felt, the humiliation. Sean tried to run, but I grabbed him by the collar again, yanking him toward me. This time I didn't hold back. Blow after blow, I landed punches with brutal precision, years of anger and betrayal pouring out through every strike. He was barely able to stand, blood streaming down his face, his shirt torn and stained with dirt as he fell to his knees. "Lisa deserves better than you," he gasped, barely able to speak through swollen lips. The words hit me like a knife, and for a moment I saw red. My fist crashed into his jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. He didn't move. His breathing was shallow, labored, and for a split second I hesitated, staring down at the man who had ruined my life. Was this enough? I took a step back, my chest heaving. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made everything feel surreal, like I was standing outside my own body, watching this play out from a distance. But as I stood there, fists bloodied, the weight of what I'd done began to sink in. Sean wasn't moving. I crouched down, checking his pulse. It was weak, but still there. He wasn't dead, but he wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. I glanced around, my mind racing. The park was deserted, just as I'd planned. No one had seen us. There was no evidence, no witnesses. I had covered my tracks well. I stood, wiping my hands on the inside of my jacket. The cold air stung my skin, the reality of what I'd done finally catching up with me. I looked down at Sean one last time, his body crumpled on the ground, barely clinging to consciousness. This was what he deserved. But a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe I had gone too far. Maybe, just maybe, I had crossed a line I couldn't come back from. I turned and walked back to my car, my mind a blur of conflicting emotions. The plan wasn't over yet. I still had more to do, more pieces to move before this game was finished. But as I drove away, leaving Sean broken and bleeding in the dirt, the guilt began to creep in. Back home, Lisa was waiting. I ignored her calls. She'd been texting me all day, panicked about the money, about Sean, and probably wondering where I was. Let her wonder. She was about to find out just how much worse things could get. I showered, scrubbing the blood from my hands, but it felt like it would never come off. The water turned pink as it swirled down the drain, and I stood there, the heat scalding my skin, but it couldn't wash away the growing unease gnawing at me. When I stepped out, my phone buzzed again. Lisa, frantic. The message was clear. "Steve, something happened to Sean. He's in the hospital." "Where are you? What's going on?" I didn't respond, not yet. I needed time to think, time to decide what my next move would be. The plan had been so clear before, so precise, but now, after seeing the damage I'd inflicted, I wasn't sure if I could follow through with the rest. I wanted her to suffer, to feel the weight of her betrayal, but I hadn't expected to feel this hollow. The satisfaction I'd anticipated was missing, replaced by an unsettling numbness. Lisa kept calling, but I let the phone ring. I wasn't ready to face her yet, not while my mind was still reeling from what I'd done to Sean. I sat in the dark, staring at the screen as her messages poured in, each one more desperate than the last. She was falling apart, just like I had planned. But the victory I'd imagined didn't feel like a victory at all. Eventually, I sent her a single message. "I'm not finished yet. You'll know when I am." It was enough to push her further into panic. But as soon as I hit send, the weight of everything pressed down on me. I had crossed a line today, one I wasn't sure I could come back from. I thought about Sean lying in that hospital bed, broken and bloodied because of me. And for the first time since this all began, doubt crept in. Had I gone too far? Lisa's phone rang again, cutting through my thoughts. I let it go to voicemail, but her voice played in my head, frantic and scared. This was what I wanted, her world crumbling around her. But as I stared at the phone in my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control of the very plan I'd so carefully constructed. I wasn't finished yet, but I was starting to wonder what finishing would even mean. Tomorrow I'd have to face her. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events of the last few weeks, every detail sharp and unforgiving. Lisa's affair, the lies, the moments when she thought I wasn't paying attention, it all circled back like a relentless storm, feeding the anger that never quite left. And now Sean was in the hospital because of me. Lisa was unraveling. But the plan wasn't over. Her messages had grown more desperate. She called me again at dawn, her voice shaking on the voicemail, pleading for answers. "Steve, where are you? Please, we need to talk. I'm scared." She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know the half of it. I got out of bed, still ignoring her calls, and went downstairs to make coffee. The house was silent, the kind of quiet that amplifies the tension in the air. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what was to come. Today would be the day she saw everything for what it truly was. By noon, I couldn't avoid her any longer. She sent one final message. "I'm coming home. We need to talk." I knew she was panicking. Whatever she had heard about Sean's condition at the hospital had pushed her over the edge. Good. It was time for her to face the consequences. She arrived an hour later, bursting through the front door, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. The second she saw me, standing calmly in the living room, she broke. "Steve, where have you been?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "I've been trying to call you for hours. Sean is in the hospital. They said—" She stopped herself, taking a deep breath, trying to steady her shaking hands. "They said someone attacked him. You were gone. Where were you?" I said nothing, just watched as she paced, her panic growing with every second of silence that stretched between us. She looked like a woman on the verge of breaking, and part of me relished it. "Steve, please," she pleaded. "What's going on? I need to know what happened." I finally spoke, my voice calm, measured. "You already know, Lisa." She stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know everything," I said, my voice cold. "About you, about Sean, about the lies." Her face went white, all the blood draining from it in an instant. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not the kind of fear you get from a bad dream or a sudden noise. This was deeper. She knew the walls were closing in and there was no escape. I don't understand," she stammered. But the panic in her voice gave her away. She knew exactly what I meant. I took a step closer, my eyes never leaving hers. "Don't play dumb, Lisa. I've known for months. I've seen the texts, the photos. I know about every lie you told, every time you said you were working late, you weren't careful enough." Her hands flew to her mouth as she stumbled back, shaking her head in disbelief. No, Steve, it's not like that. I can explain." "Please, let me explain." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that echoed in the room. "Explain? What exactly do you think you can explain? That you've been sleeping with Sean for over a year? That you've been betraying me, our family, while I was right here, trying to hold everything together?" She took another step back, her body trembling. "Steve, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Sorry?" I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. "You're sorry now? After everything? After all the lies, the sneaking around, you think sorry is enough?" Tears streamed down her face and she tried to step toward me, but I moved back. I wasn't going to let her close, not now, not after everything. "Steve, please," she sobbed. "I made a mistake. I love you." You don't love me," I said coldly. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have thrown away everything we had for him." Her tears came harder, but they didn't affect me the way they used to. Before, I might have felt sorry for her, might have wanted to comfort her, even after all of this. But now all I felt was disgust. The woman standing in front of me was a stranger. She collapsed onto the couch, her hands shaking as she covered her face. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. It just happened. I don't know how it got so out of control." "Out of control," I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "You've been sleeping with him for a year. You planned vacations together. You took money from our accounts to spend on him. You lied to me, to our kids. You think that just happened?" Her shoulders shook as she sobbed into her hands. She was falling apart, and for a moment I felt a flicker of satisfaction. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? To see her broken, just like she had broken me? But the satisfaction was fleeting. It wasn't lost enough. "You've lost everything, Lisa," I said quietly, my voice carrying a finality that made her look up through her tears. "The money, the house, our life together. It's gone." "I've already made sure of that." She blinked, her tear-streaked face frozen in shock. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've drained our accounts. There's nothing left for you. The savings, the investments, everything gone. I've taken it all." Her eyes widened, the reality of what I was saying sinking in. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No, Steve, you wouldn't." "Oh, I would," I said, feeling a dark sense of satisfaction return. "And I did." She shook her head as if trying to wake herself from a nightmare. "How could you do this? How could you just take everything? How could you throw away our marriage?" I shot back. "How could you look me in the eye every day and lie to my face? You made your choices, Lisa. Now you get to live with them." She stood up suddenly, her panic turning to anger. "You can't just ruin my life like this. You think you're justified because I made a mistake? This is insane." I stepped closer, my voice ice cold. "A mistake? This wasn't a mistake, Lisa. This was deliberate. You didn't slip up once or twice. You had an affair for a year. You betrayed me over and over again, and now you're paying for it." She tried to hold my gaze, but I could see the fear creeping back in. She was cornered, and she knew it. "Where are you going to go now, Lisa?" I asked, my tone almost mocking. "Back to Sean. Because I doubt he's in any shape to help you. He'll be lucky if he makes it out of that hospital at all." Her breath hitched, and she looked at me in horror. What did you do to him?" "I made sure he understands the consequences of his actions," I said simply. "Just like you're about to." Her face crumpled, her hands trembling as she reached for me. "Steve, please. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can—" "There's nothing left to fix," I cut in sharply. "You've destroyed everything. There's no coming back from this." The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa stood there, broken, her once perfect world crumbling around her. She had nothing left. No money, no lover, no husband, and for the first time she realized it. I took a step back, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. It was over. The plan had been executed perfectly. But as I stood there, watching her break down in front of me, I realized something else. I wasn't satisfied. Not really. I had done everything I set out to do, humiliated her, destroyed her life, left her with nothing. But the hollow ache in my chest hadn't gone away. The revenge I had imagined, the satisfaction I thought I'd feel, it was missing. Maybe it always would be. I turned and headed for the door, ignoring her cries as she begged me not to leave. "I'm not finished yet," I said quietly as I stepped outside, the cold air biting against my skin. "But you'll know when I am." And with that, I walked away, leaving her alone in the ruins of the life she had so carelessly destroyed. I didn't return to the house. I couldn't. There was nothing left for me there, except the memories of her betrayal and the ghost of the life we once had. Instead, I drove aimlessly, letting the road stretch ahead of me in silence. My phone buzzed with one last message from Lisa, but I didn't bother reading it. There was nothing she could say now that would change anything. My part in this was over, and I needed to move forward. Somewhere far from the wreckage we'd both created. A few days passed. I rented a small apartment in a town where no one knew me, blending into the background like I was nothing more than a shadow. The anonymity felt like a relief. No one asked questions. No one knew the man carrying the weight of the decisions he'd made. I spent my time quietly, watching the people around me go about their normal, mundane lives. It was strange to witness that kind of simplicity again, knowing I'd given mine up the moment I decided to destroy Lisa's world. But it wasn't enough. The satisfaction I had craved still hadn't come. I thought tearing her life apart would fill the void, that revenge would soothe the ache of her betrayal. But all it left me with was a hollow space where my anger used to be. I tried to shake it, but the more I tried to move on, the more it gnawed at me. One morning, as I sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee from a chipped mug, I opened my laptop. For the first time since leaving her, I allowed myself to check in on Lisa. My heart pounded as I pulled up social media, scrolling through the life she'd been left with after I'd walked away. It wasn't hard to find the destruction I had caused. Her posts had gone from frequent and vibrant to nearly non-existent. She had become a ghost, just like me. The images from a few weeks ago showed her with Sean, smiling, happy, oblivious. Now there was nothing. No updates, no carefully curated photos of her perfect life. The few comments I found were from friends asking if she was okay. Clearly, she hadn't responded, and for some reason that gave me a sick sense of satisfaction. I had done this. I had stripped her of everything. But as I stared at the empty digital trail she left behind, I realized something else. I hadn't just ruined her life. I'd ruined mine too. There was no going back. Every move I'd made, every calculated step toward revenge, had only pushed me further from the man I used to be. I closed the laptop, leaning back in my chair. The air in the room felt heavy, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. Was this what I wanted? Was this the freedom I thought I'd gain? It didn't feel like victory. It felt like emptiness. Lisa was broken, but so was I. A week later, I found myself staring at my phone again. Lisa hadn't tried to reach out since that final message, and for a brief moment, I wondered if she had finally given up. Maybe she was moving on too in her own way. But then a part of me knew better. She was still trapped, just like I was. Stuck in the aftermath of what we had done to each other. I needed to let go. I needed to end it for good. I opened the messaging app and typed the words I hadn't wanted to admit until now. I'm done. I've moved on. I won't come back. I hovered over the send button for a long time, staring at the text as if it could somehow undo everything. But I knew it couldn't. Nothing could. Finally, I pressed send and threw the phone onto the couch, the sound of it landing muffled in the silence. The weight I'd been carrying shifted, but it didn't disappear. I wasn't sure if it ever would. A few days later, I received a reply. It was short, just 2 words. Thank you. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Lisa was free, or at least as free as she could ever be now. The damage I'd done wasn't something she could just walk away from. The money, the house, her lover, all gone. And even though I'd told myself I was finished, I knew she'd never escape the scars I'd left behind. The last time I checked on her, there were no new photos, no new posts. Her social circle had dried up, and from what I could tell, she had retreated into isolation. Maybe it was the guilt, or maybe it was the fear that I would come back. Either way, she was as alone as I felt, and in that twisted, bitter way, it was exactly what I had wanted. Weeks turned into months, and I settled into the quiet routine of my new life. I worked a few odd jobs, kept to myself, and avoided getting too close to anyone. The revenge, the anger, even the lingering sense of guilt, they had dulled with time, but they hadn't disappeared. There were moments when I felt the ache of it all come rushing back, like a wave I couldn't stop. I thought about what might have been, how things could have turned out differently if I had just walked away from the beginning, if I had never gone down that path of destruction. But I had, and there was no changing it. One day, months after I had left Lisa behind, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The world felt still, like it was holding its breath. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about what came next. I wasn't sure if I believed in new beginnings. Not really, not after everything, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of what I had done. I had to make peace with it, even if that peace came in the form of quiet acceptance. I had to let it all go. I hadn't forgiven Lisa. Maybe I never would, but in some strange, twisted way, I was starting to forgive myself. I had taken control of a situation that had spiraled out of control, and even though I had destroyed everything in the process, I had survived. And that, in itself, was something. I stood up, taking a deep breath as the last light of the day faded from the sky. The road ahead wasn't clear, but at least now it was mine. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do next, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't consumed by revenge. I wasn't defined by the pain Lisa had caused. I was more than the sum of my anger. As I walked back inside, closing the door behind me, I knew that I wouldn't check on her again. Her life was no longer my concern. She would pick up the pieces or she wouldn't. But either way, I had finally freed myself from the prison of our past, and that was enough. Maybe I would never find complete closure. Maybe the scars we had left on each other would never fully heal. But as the days stretched ahead, one thing was clear. I was ready to leave that chapter behind. Ready to move on, and I would, starting now.